Evening, everyone. Hello. I may be a bit warm tonight because the radiators are going absolutely insane. But I thought what I'd have a little talk about is the behind the scenes staff. Keir Starmer's chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney. I think he's getting a lot of things wrong. And I'm not going to say, oh, he's useless. I'm not going to say Morgan McSweeney is useless, should be sacked or anything like that, because he's clearly incredibly skillful as a campaigner. Morgan McSweeney, for those who don't know much about him, he goes way back. He's been at the top level campaigning for Labour for like 20 years, on and off, of course, depending on the leader. He was, a fairly key part of Labour's 2005 general election win, which was just like this year, an absolute master, although he didn't mastermind it himself, but he worked on it, a masterstroke of efficient voting. I mean, in 2005 was the year when I became a committed supporter of proportional representation. Because in 2005, for those who don't remember, Labour and the Conservatives got roughly the same number of votes. Labour got a little bit more, but very, very close. And yet Labour won a very comfortable majority, and the Tories ended up with a rubbish haul again. And yet they got virtually the same number of votes. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, well, I'm glad Labour won. But what would I feel like if this was the other way around and the Tories won such a majority on such a low share of the vote? I would not be happy. I'd be outraged, in fact. So I thought, well, I have to be outraged whichever party wins in that situation. But anyway, the point is, Morgan McSweeney is clearly a very, very good campaigner. He knows how to run an election campaign. He knows how to... He's very focused on the efficiency of the vote, targeting key voters. And all of that went swimmingly. This election, I still keep seeing people go, oh, Labour didn't win it, the Tories lost it. It's like, if you look at the detail of the polling, you can see that the very people, the very voters Labour were targeting and the very areas Labour were targeting were the areas where they made the greatest gains. And the sort of voters that Labour could afford to lose support amongst were the ones where they actually got very small gains or actually did get losses amongst them. So it was, under the bonnet, the Labour campaign was absolutely superb. Obviously, they were helped by the Tories being utterly useless as well. However, I just worry that what's happened since the election is that Morgan McSweeney is effectively the victim of the Peter principle. Now, for those who don't know, I'm sure you've all experienced, not necessarily personally, but known others, or you may have experienced it personally, the Peter principle. It's the idea, so let's say you've got this large organisation and there's a promotion in the offing at a workplace, say. And so you get, a load of people, maybe they're external candidates, maybe internal candidates, whatever, but they're all candidates who've done a different job. Like it's like a promotion, right? So you're doing a particular job and you're really good at it. And let's say you get this promotion on the basis that you're really good at that job, but the job you're now getting, because it's a promotion, has subtly, maybe very different skill sets. So you may not be as competent at the new job, and then maybe it happens again. So it's this idea that people can get promoted until they end up being incompetent, because they're effectively moving to more and more senior jobs, but ones with different skill sets. And then you end up in a position where you're actually no good at the job you're doing. You were just given it on the basis of being good at other jobs. And I worry that the same is true of Morgan McSweeney here, because if we look at the situation, so running Labour's campaign, and of course he should do that, and of course he should do that from Downing Street. So he should have a senior position within Downing Street in order to be helping to guide Labour's strategy for the next election. However, when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, Morgan McSweeney was officially made his chief political advisor, which I don't think was a great move, and then his chief of staff, which is really a government position. It's publicly paid. So that should be a focus on Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, not Keir Starmer, the Labour leader for the next election. And if we look at the mistakes that Morgan McSweeney has made, and although Keir Starmer obviously has to take responsibility as well, because he ultimately decides. But at the end of the day, what is the point of having advisors if you do not take their advice? So, the skill really is to get the right advisors in the right positions. So let's have a look at the at what's gone wrong. First of all, the winter fuel allowance policy. Now, multiple people to blame for this. First of all, Rachel Reeves. She's a politician. She should have known that that was never going to fly, that it was going to get the party into deep trouble. However, it came out of the Treasury. Everything goes through 10 Downing Street, that Keir Starmer's office. Morgan McSweeney will have known about that policy before it was announced. He will know about all policies before they're announced. He should have looked at it and straight away said, no. Or at least not the way they did it. Because we all know, it's not hindsight. Everyone was saying, I mean, I assumed that they were going to do it at least competently. Because when Rachel Reeves announced the winter fuel allowance thing, I said, it's very bold. I think those were my exact words. It's very bold to take money off pensioners. And I said, but they could make it work as long as it's actually genuinely means tested. Means tested means people above a certain level of income don't get it. Below a certain level of income do get it. That's means testing. It's not means tested because there's a lot of people on low incomes that are not getting it just because they don't have pension credit. Many of them don't know they can get pension credit or don't apply it for other reasons or any of the other benefits. What they should have done was what Martin Lewis suggested, which is to automatically give it to all pensioners who live in a council tax band A to D home. That would have solved the problem, he reckons. But the point is that Morgan McSweeney should never have allowed that policy to be announced in its current form. If he couldn't see that that was going to be, for not very much money saved, a PR disaster, he's not a good political advisor. Then we had two things in the budget that have gone very badly wrong. The bus fare cap, which doesn't actually affect the sort of people imagine. So, because I keep seeing people talking about, those who get the bus to work and back every day on low incomes. It's like, yeah, they're not the ones affected by the fare cap. Because if you get the bus to work and back every day, you don't pay the single journey fare. You buy a weekly saver. Now, there might be some parts of the country where the weekly saver isn't as good value. I don't know. But certainly my experience, a weekly saver works out cheaper than 10 bus rides. But at the same time, it's still something that's pissed a lot of people off. And then, of course, there was the inheritance tax thing with farmers. What they should have done was realised, again, the last thing you want to do with 100 rural seats is piss off farmers. And all they had to do to make the same money was distinguish between a farmer and a land squatter like Jeremy Clarkson. So all they had to do, there are various ways of doing it. Dan Needle, tax lawyer, came up with a way of doing it. France, they do it. It's not beyond the wit of man to come up with these systems. Again, Morgan McSweeney should have kiboshed that and didn't. And now, of course, his latest. So the Louise Haigh thing. So when I did the video on it, it was breaking news. So I didn't really know a great deal. And I imagined, I didn't know. I said I didn't know. But I was sort of going, I hope that she has just resigned. I hope that what she's done is gone, oh, this is, the way I'd have hoped it has panned out is Louise Haigh has sat there the night before going, right, Labour are already in a hole. They've already, in a bit of a hole. And like a good little trooper, she says, we really don't need this. I'll just resign. But that does not appear, we're not going to know all the details, but that doesn't appear to be what happened. The reports suggest, and there's credibility for this as well, reports suggest Morgan McSweeney suggested that she should resign for a breach of the ministerial code. And if you don't know what that means, it means there's a suggestion that she should have declared this conviction, because when you're made a minister, you're supposed to disclose a load of things. And Morgan McSweeney says, oh, well, you didn't disclose this on your official forms, even though Keir Starmer knew about it. But Louise Haigh says that the form she was given said unspent convictions, and this is spent. It's been spent years ago. So there's some argy-bargy there. But there's some people who think that basically Morgan McSweeney's had it in for Louise Haigh for a while, and he just saw his opportunity, and they don't put it past him to have actually leaked, because someone's leaked this information, someone who knew about this conviction. And remember, it's not on any record, so it's not an easy thing to find. And, you know, some people suspect McSweeney, I don't know credibly, I think they're just jumping to conclusions, that he might have leaked it himself. And the thing is, this is also an error of judgment, because first of all, a chief of staff should not really be advising anyone to resign. That should be purely for the Prime Minister. But the other thing is this. If you think about, even if you think Louise Haigh is absolutely guilty, I know she's officially guilty because she admitted to being guilty, even though the magistrate basically discharged her with no further action, not even a fine. So the magistrate obviously thought it was just like, you know, but it doesn't matter. Let us imagine that Louise Haigh really was like a bit of a silly 20-something-year-old and thought, oh, this is a good way to wangle a new phone from my employer, right? Let's say that. That is, I would say, less serious than a speeding fine. Because that's also, if you get clobbered for speeding, that is also a criminal conviction. If you, I mean, I know you can sort of get away with that if you just take the lesson or the points or whatever. But let's say you protest it and you end up being convicted. That's a criminal conviction. And that's more serious, because if you're speeding, that's like you saying that other people's lives aren't as important as you making your journey a bit shorter. So does that mean that any cabinet minister who it turns out has a speeding offence has to resign as well? I mean, even Dan Hodges of the Mail on Sunday couldn't believe this, because it sets the bar really low now for resignations. It's basically saying, if you have, and I know they'll try and argue, oh no, but it's only those who didn't disclose it. Well, what if someone doesn't disclose a speeding fine they got 20 years ago? Look through some comments before we go to the next bit. Dan there saying, I love the channel. Wanted to ask, in terms of the government response to the free speech petition, opposed to telling the press what they can and cannot say. Hang on a minute. Let me just check. Let me get it up then. Because I haven't actually seen the government response yet. I know it passed the 10,000 a little while ago, so let's have a look. Is this it? Oh my God, there's a massive statement from the government. Okay, shall we read it? I hadn't read it before. Oh, it's only been brought out yesterday. It says the government. So this is the petition that I sort of helped promote. So Josh of Movement Forward put it in. So the actual petition calls for, we believe that lies, fraud and media toxicity threaten our way of life. We think new mechanisms are needed to preserve confidence. How else can people know what to trust? Create a people's consultation to drive debate on the following areas: safeguarding free expression, promoting digital literacy, accountability of media platforms, accountability of individuals, ministers, the media and tech, the effects of AI and algorithms on our national narrative, regulation of news publishers, potential financial incentives of inciting division. We believe we must learn and act to protect our democracy. So usually you do not get a very long government response. This is massive. Let me go through it quite quickly. The government keeps all legislation under review, but does not plan to hold a specific public consultation on freedom of speech and disinformation in the UK at this time. So it leaves the door open. We recognise the threat misinformation, disinformation pose to our democracy and understand the widespread public concern on the issue. Creating a safer online world is a priority for the government, and the Online Safety Act will be our key legislative tool for this. That's disappointing, because that does not take account of disinformation in the printed media or broadcast media, mostly the printed media. The Act takes so it's going on, actually it's mostly going on about the Act. I know Labour are reviewing it. It said, I'm just going down here. We also understand the importance of building societal resilience in this context. Evidence shows that improving media literacy helps people more easily recognise misinformation, disinformation, government's given almost £3 million in grant funding to media literacy projects since 2022. Yeah, ain't worked though, has it? Finally, the government recognises that society's shift online presents new challenges and opportunities to news media and the provision of trustworthy information. We're committed to a free and independent media. It's not independent right now, though, is it? And understand that having a free and fair press is completely separate from the government. In an age of misinformation is important. Blah, blah, blah. We are also clear, however, that with this freedom comes responsibility, which media organisations must take seriously in this context. An independent self-regulatory regime is important. Hang on a minute. To ensure the press adhere... That's bollocks. In this context, an independent self-regulatory regime. What does that mean? Because at the moment the press does self-regulate, but they're not independent. Is important to ensure press adheres to clear and high standards and offers individuals a means of redress where they're not met. The government is opposed to the idea that politicians should be telling the press what they can and cannot say. While there are currently no plans to hold a formal public consultation, we assure you that your concerns have and continue to be heard. I mean, I suppose it leaves the door open for a bit later, but it's not. Anyway. John, they're saying, is McSweeney in danger of becoming a double-edged sword? Well, I think so. Because I'll tell you where it could go wrong for me, Morgan McSweeney. So he's obviously really good at organising campaigns. So you would absolutely want him to be organising Labour's next general election. And that obviously doesn't mean just sending him away and wheeling him back just in time. I mean, that's like an ongoing process, right? But he's not a good political advisor, as has been demonstrated by the fact the winter fuel allowance. I mean, that hasn't even properly bitten the government on the arse yet. That will this winter. I mean, that's a trap that hasn't even sprung yet. The inheritance farms things is a right quagmire now. The bus fare, I think that's not something that the media are making a big song and dance about. However, lots of individual people could be aggrieved at it. And then the Louise Haigh thing, I mean, the next time a cabinet minister is found to have done something very innocuous and they don't resign and Starmer doesn't expect them to resign, it's going to look like double standards. It's like, because there's already people looking at this with, I mean, the only good thing that's come, there's only two good things that have come out of this. First of all, we now have the first cabinet in history which is entirely state educated, because Louise Haigh was actually privately educated. But the other good thing is it does let the government say, you know, we are applying high standards even to ourselves. The downsides are there are people going, well, hang on a minute, this pro-nationalisation cabinet minister is being elbowed out, and it very much looks like, you know, this was like the weakest way to tell her to resign. It was absolutely pathetic. And people will inevitably think, if, you know, people who don't have a charitable view towards either Starmer or McSweeney will probably conclude McSweeney probably leaks the information in the first place just to make it happen. It wouldn't make sense for Starmer to have done it, because remember, if Starmer was worried about this conviction, he wouldn't, like, imagine if it had come out during the general election. Starmer was obviously comfortable with that. So, yeah. What's my honest opinion? Is Morgan McSweeney better or is Sue Gray better? Sue Gray was never even properly tested, in my view. Absolutely not tested. She was blamed. There was argy-bargy between her and McSweeney, but as far as I'm concerned, that was McSweeney's fault. As in terms of the information I have, again, we will, when it's stuff behind closed doors, we will never know the full story for years. But as far as I can tell, that was McSweeney getting a cob on. There were some advisors belly aching that she was getting paid more than the Prime Minister. Tough titty. It's not to do with them. There were, you know, like, and everything else, like the winter fuel allowance, stuff like that. Yes, she would have known about that as well. But that was from Morgan McSweeney, was Keir Starmer's chief political advisor at the time. So that was still his job to say this is a bad idea, not Sue Gray's. The chief of staff's job is to make sure that the Prime Minister's office runs smoothly. So you're sort of controlling what messages go out to the press, what, you know, feeding things out to the cabinet in terms of this is the line we're taking this week, here are your briefing notes, that sort of stuff, making sure the office runs smoothly. That is the Chief of Staff's job. Yes, the Chief of Staff will often advise on political matters as well, but the Prime Minister has other political advisors too. So to my mind, Sue Gray was not even properly tested. Perhaps people saying, until they sort out the disgraceful media attitude and bias, Labour may as well have one hand tied behind their back. Always, yes. The problem is at the moment they seem to be enjoying having both hands tied behind their back because they are feeding this biased media easy lines. I mean, okay, in the last couple of weeks, arguably they've been a bit better. But, you know, someone just says, is anyone keeping an eye on the election in Ireland? I think I'm going to wait a couple of days for the final results on that. Obviously, it does look very much like not a lot of change. It's still probably going to be a coalition between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, doesn't it? So it's like, yeah. Starmer should take responsibility for a resignation. If he knew about the conviction, why did he appoint her when it could have become a public issue? Well, this is the thing. I mean, this is why it is. There's multiple reasons. I mean, there's like one reason why it can work, and there's multiple reasons why it doesn't work. The one way it can work is like if Morgan McSweeney was a really shit-hot political advisor and Labour were running this really tight ship and they were just being utterly ruthless. And do you know what? Even if it's unfair, if anyone can attract negative headlines, they're going to be removed. If that was what was going on, I would say, okay, because the greater good, this is about not... I'm not that... I don't like anyone to be treated unfairly. But being a politician means you are going to be treated unfairly. It comes with the territory. The important thing is the tens of millions of people that need a decent government. So that's who I think about. But that's not what's happened. You know, the downsides to all of this are, first of all, it sets an incredibly low bar now. A really low bar. What if someone that McSweeney or Starmer wouldn't dream of getting rid of? Someone like David Lammy, for example, or Ed Miliband, or Rachel Reeves. What if it transpires that one of them has some, not necessarily even a conviction, just something that is it's a little bit more serious than what Haigh did or is alleged to have done? It comes back on Labour. And then there's the fact, you know, it can look like purging the cabinet of pro-nationalisation voices. Because although she's Transport Secretary and Transport is nationalising, I mean, that's going to carry on now anyway. That was just Labour policy. There are other government departments where there are calls for nationalisation, and people may have felt that Louise Haigh would have added her weight to those calls. And now, I mean, I don't know this Heidi, I've forgotten her surname. I know that she was the Deputy Mayor of London for Transport under Sadiq Khan. So she knows how to run nationalised transport. So it's, you know, it's a good replacement by the look of it. But I don't know exactly what her views on that are. So, yeah, I think McSweeney could be... And when you say double-edged sword, here's where the double-edged sword comes into it. Because, so, he's messing up on the political advice. Keir Starmer is known to be ruthless. At some point, let's say it keeps going wrong, Starmer is not going to not act. He's not necessarily going to jump the gun, but he's clearly going to... And if it transpires that McSweeney is the problem, here's my fear. You end up sacking him. Whereas we don't want him sacked. What we want him to do is to focus, which he can do as Chief of Staff, focus on getting Labour ready for the next election, focus on that campaigning, focus on dealing with the polling, surveying, focus groups, analysing all the results, do all that, and get other people to scrutinise the political moves in government. My fear is that we end up, because look what happened with Sue Gray, right? She's now wasted, because Starmer's lost her. She, she wasn't going to be chief of staff. She wouldn't accept the other position. She could have been the new cabinet secretary. We need a new cabinet secretary. It could have been Sue Gray. She'd have been able to do that job really well. But that's been blown now because there's too much loss of trust, I guess. And the same could happen with McSweeney. Labour could end up losing him as a campaign strategist just because he'd... So it could be a double-edged sword. You could, it's a right mess. It's an absolutely hideous mess. Pronator there saying, David Lammy was someone I would have liked to see become leader someday. Not sure since he voted against the assisted dying bill. I mean, I wouldn't like put too much store against that. That is a genuinely nuanced argument. I don't think you would see David Lammy as leader because he does suffer from mental health problems. So I think, something he mentions himself. So probably Foreign Secretary is the highest position he would even want, because obviously being leader and particularly being Prime Minister is like the most stressful job almost imaginable if you take it seriously. I mean, all you have to do is look at the way certain Prime Ministers aged, the ones who took it seriously, that is. Tony Blair aged like 20 years in a day, didn't he? Gordon Brown did. He wasn't even Prime Minister for more than a few years. But anyway. It sounds like Starmer's damned if he accepts resignation, damned if he doesn't. Well, the thing is, the resignation should never have been made. McSweeney should not have advised... First of all, the resignation was not made public until Starmer had been informed anyway. He should have asked Haigh... I'm not sure he did anyway. But if the reason for Haigh resigning was because she was advised it was going to look like a breach of the ministerial code, Starmer at that point should have said, this is bollocks, don't talk shit. And said, do not resign. Starmer is responsible. I don't think he's damned if he doesn't, damned if he doesn't. I don't think Labour would have had a lot to worry about over this, because the whataboutery is powerful. I don't think most people would have had a pop at Haigh. The Tories and Reform UK are the only ones who would. And against the Tories, you just point out a whole list of misdeeds of Tory cabinet ministers who never resigned. And for Reform UK, you just point at James McMurdoch and go, you might want to sort out your own house first. But there we go. Putting says, I can't say I noticed much change from David Cameron. No, he along with Boris Johnson was probably an exception. David Cameron was famously a very lazy Prime Minister. In fact, he used to insist on having date nights with his wife, which the Tory press never had a pop at, by the way. Keir Starmer says, I'd like Friday evenings to spend with my family, and they go mental. You're supposed to be the Prime Minister, you don't get time off. Even though he has spent Friday evenings working when emergencies have cropped up. But David Cameron absolutely dropped everything for his date nights with his wife. And it's like, oh, that's nice. But it's like, no, he's Prime Minister. The reason why Syria blew up is largely because David Cameron, messed up. He was an incredibly lazy Prime Minister. David Cameron, I keep describing, to me, it occurs to me that David Cameron... his ambition was not to become Prime Minister like most people from Eton. His ambition was to become an ex-Prime Minister. I always felt that David Cameron was just waiting. As soon as he became Prime Minister, he was just waiting to resign. And then when the opportunity came along, there you go. Couldn't Starmer refuse the resignation? Yes, because it doesn't sound to me like Haigh wanted to resign. It sounded to me like McSweeney had advised her that it was in the best interests of the Labour Party, the Labour government. So basically, she's been a trooper and, put the party ahead of herself, which all MPs should. But I don't think that's correct. I don't think she would have been a problem for Labour by not resigning. But at the end of the day, it's done. What's done is done. She's young. She will be back in cabinet at some point because it's absolutely ridiculous. I've never seen such a ridiculous reason for resigning from cabinet. I cannot think of any weaker reason for doing so. So there we go. Surely this is an ongoing battle within Labour between neoliberals and that. I'm going to have to say, there are no neoliberals in Labour, or at least not the top of Labour. Please stop using that term when, neoliberalism is when you, there's several aspects to it, but you want a small state. Not even Tony Blair was basically a centrist. He wasn't centre-left. He was very centre, I would say. Even he was not neoliberal. Neoliberalism specifically is about this idea of small state. It's a very not just accepting of capitalism, but very pro-capitalism. No one's like that. However, there are some in Labour who are very uncomfortable with any level of, say, privatised use of public funds. And there are people in Labour who are much more comfortable with the idea of it, or at least accepting of it. And yes, there is tribalism in Labour. There is always a battle with that. And I don't know what Haigue's replacement is like. But if McSweeney got rid of Haigh because he didn't like the fact she was very pro-nationalisation, then he will also have been instrumental in choosing her successor. Obviously Starmer's decision, but McSweeney inevitably would have added his thoughts there. That might suggest that maybe Haigue's successor is not as pro-nationalisation, should we say. So yeah, it very much looks like there's a bloody turf war going on that's now spread to cabinet, which I'm not at all happy about. It was bad enough under the last Labour government when after about 10 years they started infighting. This, we don't want to start it in the first few months. Haigh was one of my favourite ministers, top 5, maybe top 3. I said she was definitely in my top 5. I mean, there's maybe only 4 I think have been absolutely superb. I would say Angela Rayner has. She's done very well. Ed Miliband, I knew he would anyway. Louise Haigh is certainly one as well. There are a few that I think have by and large done very well. But they're also I think there's things they've cocked up as well. So David Lammy, I think, has cocked up a few times. But by and large, he's still the best foreign secretary that Labour could probably put forward. There's some others that are very untested at the moment. But we'll see. Is there a way back for Haigh? Yeah, God, yeah. Easy. I mean, Peter Mandelson came back. And he had to resign from cabinet for actually being dodgy. And he came back. If the Prime Minister wants you back, you're coming back. The problem at the moment is Starmer obviously wasn't that bothered about keeping her because this was a pathetic scandal. But under a new leader, I mean, again, she's young, right? So under a new leader, yeah, she'll be back. Guessing she's still a backbencher, or there needs to be a by-election. No, she's just by-election. She's not resigned as an MP, just as a government minister. So she'll be a backbencher now. Which is a shame because it means that it's too late for her even to be given the chair of a select committee. So she's now got no decent role. She's just a backbencher, which is a bit crap. It's such a waste. It really is a waste. McSweeney, again, I'm not going to say he's an idiot. He's not an idiot. But in his current role, yeah, he is. It's a bit like Rishi Sunak. I always balked at calling him an imbecile because he's clearly not. He's a very clever man. You have to be very clever to work, as an investment banker. But when it came to politics, he was an idiot. And when it comes to basic politics, McSweeney is as well. Which is weird. Blair believed in trickle-down economics. I'm not going to disagree strongly with that, but I'm not sure it's quite true. I think where Blair came from is a position of, so let's look at the current budget. So there'll be lots of people who are going, we need to get rid of, I'm one of them, We need to get rid of privatisation from public services. Basically, government money, taxpayer money, should not really be used on private services. That's my politics. That's not to say that no public money ends up being spent in the private sector, because I'm not suggesting that hospitals make their own x-ray machines, for example. So certain goods and sometimes services, like if it's a new IT system needs developing and implementing, sure, okay. Yeah, you can contract that out. But by and large, services should be publicly funded and publicly owned. So that's my politics. However, if you look at the level of privatisation in the country and just say, well, just nationalise it all, the cost to do so is astronomical. And although it's like, economically speaking, you can say, but if the private sector will do a thing, if they will invest in something and expect to make a return, so can the government. So we should just borrow for it. But we know what happens if you borrow too much. You can only borrow so much. Otherwise, the markets go wobbly. You know, we saw that with Liz Truss. With Rachel Reeves, remember, we had a bit of a market wobble with her £32 billion worth of borrowing. And that, they calmed down because they were okay with it in the end. But the reason we had the wobble is because they were expecting 20 billion and she came out with 32 billion. Now, imagine if she tried to borrow 200 billion. The government would already be over. Reeves would have had to have resigned by now. So that is the problem. The problem is you cannot wipe out privatisation overnight, because although you can make an economic argument to borrow as much as you like, because you'll make, if the private sector can make a return on it, so can the public sector, right? But the markets will not let you get away with it. We are, whether we like it or not, doesn't matter who's the government, we do have a capitalist system. You know, the government will be brought down if we try to challenge it too much. So that's where Blair came from. He came from the idea of he wanted lots of investment, and he knew that the government could only raise so much investment money itself. And so he said, well, we need to get the bulk of it from the private sector. And I think the difference between, say, Blair and Starmer is where Starmer sees it as necessary, Blair was just comfortable with it. He was comfortable with that system. You don't ever get the impression that Blair, let's say he'd have been Prime Minister for 30 years, he'd have like ruled eternal. You don't get the impression he would have slowly chipped away at it. Whereas you do get the impression with Starmer that he might. If he's given the time, whether he is or not, I don't know. Esfat I say, Rayner and Bill and Bandy my top as well. I mean, they need to be. Because energy, housing, and, you know, it's not just housing with Rayner, it's also communities in general. They are crucial for Labour not only winning support, but also cutting the feet from under Reform UK. Matthew, they're saying Rayner's a good deputy, but I'm concerned she's too divisive with swing voters. Tories will bring up the Tory scum remark. That would matter if she was leader. It really doesn't matter as a cabinet minister stroke deputy leader, because at the end of the day, people focus on the leader. So Rayner can be dispatched to the parts of the country where she's well received, and kept away from the areas where she's not. It's the leader that has to have universal appeal. It's not anyone else. So that's as long as you don't have someone really toxic in your cabinet. But, you know, most people don't even know who the cabinet are anyway. How should Labour's comms be sorted? They need... Right, there's several things I would do. First of all, it is just an issue of basic competence. The people they have running their comms team are not competent. They've probably got a background in with relations with the mainstream media. So they can organise a press conference. Well done. They're absolutely useless at presenting a message, and they're useless at heading off Tory messages. But the other thing they need to do, that's just in terms of like traditional comms. They also need to get a lot more savvy with social media. They don't understand it at all. No one in Downing Street has the vaguest idea how social media works. None of them. Absolutely none of them. The people that run Labour's social media strategy do not know how social media works. It's the most incompetent area of the entire party. So that needs sorting as well, because social media is your direct link with people. Your direct link with people. So you can get to a point where you do not have to care very much what the mainstream media say. If you can, Labour have the capacity to reach a lot of people on social media. They have the capacity to reach more people on social media than they will through the mainstream media. And as soon as Labour can do that, they take away a lot of the power of the mainstream media. So if Labour are shy about media reform, I would suggest, I mean, I would still say that's a priority, but I would suggest that what they should do is develop their own social media strategies, because I can demonstrate to them that they can reach more people than the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Daily Telegraph, or even the Mirror and the Guardian combined. I think I missed your comment. It does happen, Em, doesn't it? I think some people use centrist and liberal interchangeably, probably in line with the Lib Dems, who aren't really left or right particularly. Well, no, I mean, some Lib Dems are centre-left and some are centre-right. Liberal really is about social attitudes. So this is why the political compass is a better model than, say, the political spectrum. You know, there are a lot of very right-wing liberals. There are a lot of very left-wing liberals. There are a lot of very left-wing authoritarians. Joseph Stalin was one. But anyway, if Ed Miliband became leader again, the Tories will label Labour as desperate by bringing back a general election loser. Yeah, I mean, Ed Miliband... See, the thing is, Ed Miliband, I just thought was so bad as leader, leave it. He's a really good Secretary of State. He's a really good energy minister. That's his calling. Leave him there. You know, when Starmer steps down, Ed Miliband... I mean, I'm never going to say I would rule anyone out, because I don't know what the choices will be. At the end of the day, you can't just pick whoever you would like to be leader. You get a choice. You get a smorgasbord, and you have to pick. Although smorgasbord's the wrong reason, because then you eat the whole thing. But it's, you know, you have a choice. If Ed Miliband was the best available, then I would vote for Ed Miliband. But I would be gnashing my teeth at the piss-poor selection if that is the case. What do I think of the Lib Dems social media strategy? Again, it's not there. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. They actually, more than Labour, should really be doing that. I actually wouldn't mind with that. You know, like there's like, who is there? I mean, maybe a Lib Dem actually knows the answer to this. Who is there on, say, YouTube that's a really big political commentator, or on any social media platform, that's a Lib Dem supporter? Is there anyone? I know there are some Lib Dems who have a sizable platform, like Mike Martin, but that is for his expertise on security and defence matters. But is there anyone that's big on social media that is a Lib Dem, that pushes Lib Dem talking points? Have I seen the Lib Dems' recent TikToks? No, I don't use TikTok. Would I want a majority Labour government after the next general election, or Lib-Lab coalition? No, majority Labour government. You know, if there were to be a hung parliament, I'm comfortable with a Labour Liberal Democrat coalition, but I don't want one. I would rather a majority Labour government. Mark, they're saying none that I know of. Yeah, I don't know of any either. I mean, that's a problem. I know, you know, there are some big social media influencers, independent ones. I don't mean ones who just get paid by GB News or something, independent ones. I know ones who are Conservative supporters, Reform UK supporters, Labour supporters, Green Party supporters. Don't know any Lib Dem supporters. There's also some I don't actually know any Plaid supporters. I do know a couple of ones that support the SNP. Oh, it should be Darren Jones. He's lovely. Yeah, we don't need a lovely leader. We need one who can bear his fangs. I mean, maybe Darren Jones can. I don't know. Maybe Darren Jones would be decent. I mean, who knows at the end of the day, but I don't know. Apparently people say Ed Miliband's a proper nice and decent guy, never leader material. Yeah, exactly. I mean, he actually caused, unintentionally, he didn't do it maliciously, but he did cause a lot of damage to Labour. A lot of damage. And the damage is still being done, quite frankly. He didn't mean it, granted, so I don't give him too hard a time. But I do say, yeah, he should. And hopefully he recognises it. He seems humble to me as well. So hopefully he recognises that. He certainly didn't make any excuses. Putting it to the saying, I'd pick Cooper or Thornbury as decent replacements. I want Labour to have a PM who isn't straight, white and male. Yes. I mean, I would caution against just picking someone because they tick a certain, like, box like that. Emily Thornbury, I'm a huge fan of hers, but she is divisive. So I don't... Again, you need someone who's sort of acceptable to a lot of people. And I don't think Emily Thornbury... You're like, she's... It's not a criticism as such, because I'm very much like it myself. She's too in your face for a lot of people. Yvette Cooper, maybe running out of time. We'll see. Also, I think she... Like, I did vote for her when she was in the leadership election some years ago. But only as the best of what I didn't think was a great selection again. Do I think Yvette Cooper could ever be leader or PM? Would be my choice for sure. I mean, it depends how soon Keir Starmer steps down. The thing is, Yvette Cooper goes way back. If Starmer is Prime Minister, let's say things actually go well and Trump doesn't derail it all and Morgan McSweeney doesn't derail it all, and Keir Starmer is Prime Minister for about 10 years, let's say. 8 to 10 years. Would that be time for Yvette Cooper to just choose to step back at that point? Because she'll have been going on for a while. And also, you do tend to have a few casualties when a Prime Minister falls. You like want to refresh the pack. Because if the Prime Minister leaves after a long time, it's a bit like familiarity breeds contempt. Even if Starmer doesn't make any major missteps, you know, people could still decide it's time for a change, and you'll want to freshen up the front bench as well. I'm saying I was in a Labour meeting online on Wednesday evening with the Labour campaign for electoral reform. When will Labour get down to business for electoral reform? I don't know, unfortunately. I do not know. I'm hoping it'll... I mean, when it happens, or if it happens, but I'm hoping when it happens, it will very much come out of the blue. I don't think we're going to get a long run-up at it. Because the way to do it is exactly like all of the campaigns are arguing for, that you have a public consultation. Now, people want that consultation next year. Whether we get it next year or not, I don't know. When it comes, though, it will be very sudden. It will be a sudden announcement. But I honestly couldn't tell you. All I can say is the more people support it, inside Labour and outside, the more likely it is to happen. We must always promote the best man for the job, regardless of sex. So Humphrey Appleby, yeah. Would Reeves be a dark horse for leader? Possibly. But I would say, and I know we've had a couple in relatively recent years, but it is highly unusual for chancellors to go on to become prime minister. It's not unknown. We have had, in fact, we've had several in my lifetime, which is historically weird. You know, we've had John Major, Gordon Brown, and Rishi Sunak, but it is unusual. And the reason it's unusual is because, generally speaking, the Chancellor is the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are largely considered to be like conjoined twins, right? They're the Prime Minister selects a Chancellor that is of their mind, because the Chancellor of all your cabinet colleagues is the one you need to trust the most. And the one, although I say McSweeney should have got Starmer to block a few of these policies in the budget, you don't generally do a lot of it, otherwise you make it impossible for the Chancellor to do their job. So you need someone who's of the same mind as you, which means that when it's time for the leader to go, usually it's time for that Chancellor to step back as well. But there we go. I mean, I suppose the reason why some of them differed is in terms of those three examples I gave. So John Major wasn't really like Thatcher. So I suppose that's how he was able to like be a credible replacement. Gordon Brown was very much like Tony Blair, but there was that well-known sort of division between them as well. And then Rishi Sunak was not at all of the same mind of Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson selected him because of reasons. It wasn't because he was on his wavelength economically. Putting it to there, I'm not picking based on ticking the box. If I was, I'd put Streeton on that list, but I would struggle to bring myself to vote for him, to be honest. Can he hand in a resignation? I don't think he will. I'm not the biggest fan myself. I mean, I don't think any cabinet minister is. There's not a single cabinet minister I have wanted to resign, but there are some I think that are, you know, a bit blinkered on a few issues, shall we say. If we had PR with a threshold of 5%, I take this would be over the four nations. If you do it over the UK, there'd be no MPs in Northern Irelanders. Yeah, oh no. So what I would do, yeah. So for those who don't really know about this, the idea of a 5% rule or something like it is so you don't end up with a situation where you've got lots of shitty little parties that manage to form enough votes just to grab a seat when they get almost no support across the country. So the way I would do that, because obviously there are problems with just saying you need 5% of the, because sometimes it's you need 5% of the national vote. That is a non-starter in Britain because the SNP only stand candidates in Scotland and they're doing well if they get 4%. And obviously the same with Northern Irish and Welsh parties. So the way you can do it is you have to get 5% across all the constituencies where you stand a candidate. That's how I would do it. So I wouldn't base it on regions or nations or anything. I would let the parties decide. It's a way of telling them only stand candidates, because that would be a good thing. If you can persuade parties to only stand candidates where they've got a realistic chance of being successful, it also reduces the pressure to have lots of tiny splinter parties, because like a Netherlands type situation is no good. That's just mad. Ireland works well. Ireland's got a much smaller population, of course, but Ireland works well. You haven't got shitloads of parties involved in Ireland, really. You've got a big three, and then you've got, you know, a sizable, you know, amount of support for a few others and some independents. So that's what I would say. 5% applies to the constituencies where, or the regions, because proportional representation will have a regional vote as well, where you are standing candidates. That's how I would phrase it. And then leave it to individual parties to decide whether or not they should stand candidates where there's not much point. Anything we can do to persuade candidates not to stand where they don't have a chance. The odd joke candidate's fine. Monster Raving Loony Party can't bin face, of course. It's British politics at the end of the day. But for serious parties, I would actively come up with ways to persuade them only to stand where they've got a decent chance. Major was a compromise candidate as Tories didn't want Heseltine, who brought Thatcher down. Yeah, well, so it occurred to me at the time as well, yes. That's where this saying, he who wields the sword shall never wear the crown came, only it's a load of bollocks. Because Boris Johnson wielded the sword and he got to wear the crown. Rishi Sunak wielded the sword and got to wear the crown. Kemi Badenoch did her best to wield the sword and got to wear the crown. Wes Streeting is so much better than the Tory predecessors. On that, I will wholeheartedly agree. There are many good things about Wes Streeting. I mean, ironically, people talk about links with private healthcare, and I agree that's something that wants watching. And yet, people just assume he's pro-privatisation, but actually, Wes Streeting might be the most pro-nationalisation health secretary we've had, because he, in opposition, admittedly, it's not a policy, but he talked about wanting GPs to be employees of the NHS. Remember, the NHS has never been fully nationalised. We know it's becoming increasingly privatised over the last couple of decades, but it was never fully nationalised in the first place. GPs were always a privatised part of the NHS. So, last year when Wes Streeting said, well, actually, ideally, GPs would actually be working for the NHS as employees, that was an interesting comment to make. Also interesting in the context of the national insurance hike on employers' contributions, because GPs wanted to be exempt from it, because the public sector are exempt from it. So they wanted to be exempt from it, and Wes Streeting's basically gone, nah, mate, you're not public sector. So I think I don't think he's Louise Haigh level nationalisation fiend, but he might be a bit of a closet nationaliser. We'll see anyway. We will see. Darren Jones certainly has charisma. He is good. He does come across well. So he could be a chance. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, is ultimately the choice that members get. First of all, members do not necessarily know. They do not necessarily vote for the leader that is likely to have the most public support. They tend to vote for the one that appeals to the lowest common denominator, which is a bit of a problem. Remember, the only reason the members backed Keir Starmer, there was no overwhelming love for him. It was because they thought he was credible, and they were right. He was credible to the public. They were sick of losing. But when you're in power, let's say we imagine a situation, Labour win the next election, Keir Starmer is Prime Minister for a couple of years, then he steps down after that, a few years after that, he doesn't want to fight a third election. At that point, Labour members will, I think, be a bit, reckless. I think they'll think to themselves, oh, we know how to win, it's all right. We can now pick someone based on policies that we like, not that the public likes. And it'll all go wrong again. So the trick there will be making sure Labour MPs only come up with a sensible selection at least. Because just like Tory members, Labour members can usually be relied upon. I wouldn't say to pick the craziest option, because you don't usually have a crazy option like the Tories, but at least the least credible option. So GP practices are going to go under as a result. Well, we'll see. Obviously, it's not in Labour's plans that GP practices go under. There may be other workarounds. Stuffing their mouths with gold was Nye Bevan's response to making doctors accept the new NHS. Yeah, exactly. So it was always privatised, GP surgeries. What do I make of Zelensky hinting Russia occupied Ukrainian territory so long as Ukraine can obtain NATO membership? So, yeah, I'm not planning on doing a video on that because I'm not entirely sure. My instant thought to that is Zelensky knows that Trump wants a peace settlement ASAP, and it's in his interest that he looks like he's the one who's prepared to compromise and Putin's not. So I think it's a calculation on Zelensky's part to get Trump on his side and against Putin. Which could work because there is a credible, maybe I'll do a video on it, we'll see. But maybe there is a credible reason why Putin may not want to concede anything. Because apart from anything else, that actually might appeal to Trump as well, because at the end of the day, Zelensky will say to Trump, we're going to spend quite a bit of our GDP on defence. So NATO gets extra funding as well as battle-hardened troops, battle veterans, as part of NATO. And he'll say, if NATO's going to protect Ukraine anyway, why shouldn't we contribute to it? That can be his line. So it sounds like quite a smart move from Zelensky to me. It's just, I'd probably rather read what a few other people have to say about it, like experts have to say about it, before jumping to conclusions. Or maybe I won't, because I'm a political commentator. I get to shoot my mouth off whenever I like, I suppose. The problem with PR is infighting over who becomes PM. Remember 2019 when Swinson and Corbyn disagreed on who became PM? Yeah, but again, it's a system that punishes childish leaders. If you are an uncompromising leader that cannot build bridges, your party will lose out every single time. Like, look at the Irish elections. We don't know the final results, but on the exit polling on first preference results, Sinn Féin had the most votes of any individual party, but they're not going to be in government. And it was only slightly above Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil as well, because there's no bridges between them and the other two big parties. It's really that simple. So, a party will be punished if its leader does not build bridges with others. That is actually a strength of PR, that it forces a party to have leaders who are willing to see things from other people's point of view. That can only be a good thing. And they're saying policy is sometimes weird. Case in point, the whole last 14 years, but especially Bojo and Partygate, weird in capital letters. But again, it's because people are too often misled. The media do not actually inform the public. Carol, as you said in an earlier video, dealing with Trump must be transactional. Trump must feel that he gets something from every deal. Yeah. He also, the thing with Trump is, and this is what Angela Merkel has been saying recently when she's been promoting her memoirs, is he always feels he doesn't believe in mutual benefit. He believes that with every agreement there's a winner and a loser, and he wants to be the winner. So yeah, Zelensky has to be able to persuade Trump that Trump will be the winner out of this. S-Fax says, I'll be disappointed if we give up Donetsk and Luhansk. I can't pronounce that. But I can accept it. What I can't accept is Crimea, home of Crimea Tatars, and Zaporozhye, NPP. I mean, it may not come to that. This may be Zelensky said, because he didn't say he'd permanently cede territory either. He said for now, I think I'm correct in saying. But also it could just be a ploy so that he looks like he's willing to move. But because Putin, first of all, there's a good argument. I'm making this my last point. There's a good argument that Putin doesn't want the war to stop at all, a bit like Netanyahu. Netanyahu fears imprisonment, so he needs an everlasting war, at least until he dies. I don't know why he doesn't just volunteer for the front line. It could happen sooner rather than later. But for Putin, he doesn't fear prison. Someone suggested last week what he potentially fears is the fact he's got a load of Russian men fighting in Ukraine. He's got a load of people working in munitions factories in Russia. If there was suddenly peace, those soldiers aren't needed, and those munition factories, you don't need as many. So all of a sudden you double unemployment with a fragile economy, because the sanctions will still be in place until they're removed. So it could well be, and the idea of Putin accepting, because what Putin will want of a peace deal is, okay, we'll take this land and we'll pretend to give you a security guarantee, but we're actually going to come back for the rest of it later. So the last thing he wants is for the rest of Ukraine that he hasn't captured to become a NATO member. So yeah, it could be quite a smart move from Zelensky, because it could be conditions that Putin will refuse to accept. In which case, Zelensky doesn't have to make the concession. He's offering it, but it is transactional. It's like, it's in return for this. If Putin won't give in return, then all of a sudden, in Trump's eyes, Putin is the one blocking the peace deal. So that's what I would say about that. But anyway, we'll have to we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. We'll do this again next week. Have a very good rest of evening, everyone. And until next time, I'll see you later.